My name is Maya, and for 32 years, I believed I was the broken half of a perfect whole. Standing in front of the mirror each morning, I would see the same face that graced magazine covers, the same eyes that charmed investors, the same smile that had stolen 3 fiancés from me. The only difference was that when Sophia looked in the mirror, she saw success. When I looked in mine, I saw failure. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was brewing coffee in my studio apartment, a cramped space above Mrs. Chen's bakery that smelled perpetually of burnt sugar and broken dreams. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation from the shop below. Every laugh that reminded me how normal people lived their lives. My phone buzzed against the chipped countertop. Sophia's name flashed across the screen with that particular authority it always carried. As if even my phone knew she was the important twin. Maya, darling. Her voice dripped with that practiced sweetness she used when she needed something. I need you to pick up my dry cleaning. I'm closing the Henderson deal today, and I simply cannot be seen in anything less than perfection. I gripped the phone tighter, watching steam rise from my coffee cup like incense at an altar I'd been worshipping at my entire life. Of course, Sophia, the usual place, obviously, and Maya. There was a pause. The kind she used for dramatic effect. Try not to embarrass me if you run into anyone we know. I know you mean well, but people talk. The line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the black screen, seeing nothing but disappointment staring back. This was our dynamic. It had been since the day we were born, 17 minutes apart. According to our mother, though Sophia had somehow managed to turn those 17 minutes into a lifetime of superiority. She was the planned baby, the wanted one. I was the surprise that nearly killed our mother during delivery. Growing up, our parents made sure I never forgot it. Sophia got straight A's again, my father would announce at dinner, his chest swelling with pride. Maya? What happened to your science grade? Sophia's been accepted to Harvard. My mother would tell neighbors over the fence. Maya's still figuring things out. Even when I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, the celebration was muted. Sophia had just landed her first major client, at the boutique marketing firm, where she'd started as an intern. My academic achievements were footnotes in the story of her professional triumphs. But it was the men that cut the deepest. David was first. We'd met in college. In a comparative literature class where I'd spent months crafting the perfect analysis of Virginia Woolf's use of stream of consciousness narrative. He would sit beside me, leaning close enough that I could smell his cologne, asking to borrow my notes, complimenting my insights. When he finally asked me out, I felt like I was floating. I brought him home for Thanksgiving our senior year. Sophia had graduated the year before, and was working in New York, but she made a special trip home for the holiday. She walked into our parents' house wearing a cream cashmere coat, that probably cost more than my semester's tuition, her hair perfectly blown out, her smile radiant. David's eyes never left her. By Christmas they were dating. By Valentine's Day, they were engaged. I found out through Facebook, a photo of them at some upscale restaurant. Sophia's manicured hand displaying a princess cut diamond that caught the light like a promise of forever. I'm so sorry, Maya, she'd called to tell me. Though she didn't sound sorry at all. It just happened. We couldn't fight the connection. You understand, right? You want me to be happy. I understood. I understood that I was dispensable, that my feelings were secondary, that my role in life was to gracefully step aside whenever Sophia decided she wanted something I had. Marcus was next, 3 years later, a fellow teacher at the elementary school where I'd finally found my place in the world. He loved how I could make the kids laugh, how I stayed after hours to help struggling students, how I remembered every child's birthday and brought homemade cupcakes to celebrate. We dated for 2 years. He met my family at my birthday party, my 30th, a small gathering at a restaurant I couldn't really afford but wanted to seem successful for once. Sophia showed up late, making an entrance in a red dress that made every conversation stop mid-sentence. You must be Marcus, she said, extending her hand with that smile that had launched a dozen corporate campaigns. Maya's told me so much about you. I'm the better twin. She laughed like it was a joke. Marcus laughed too. 3 months later, he broke up with me over coffee, explaining that he'd found someone who challenged him more intellectually. I saw their engagement announcement in the local paper 6 weeks after that. By the time Jason came along, I thought I'd learned my lesson. I didn't bring him to family events. I didn't mention him in conversations with Sophia. I kept our relationship like a secret garden. Something beautiful that belonged only to me. But Sophia has always been exceptionally good at finding things that don't belong to her. She discovered him at the coffee shop, where we'd had our first date. I'd mentioned it once, in passing, when she'd asked why I'd been happier lately. That was my mistake, thinking I could have happiness without her permission. Jason was an architect, quiet and thoughtful, with hands that could sketch entire buildings from memory. He loved how I saw beauty in small things, how I could find wonder in a child's drawing or the way morning light filtered through classroom windows. We'd been together for 8 months. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. The morning I found them together started like any other. I'd planned to surprise Jason with coffee and pastries from Mrs. Chen's bakery before his morning meeting. I had the key to his apartment. He'd given it to me the month before, saying he wanted me to feel like I belonged somewhere. I belonged. The word had tasted like honey when he said it. I climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, balancing the coffee tray and my purse, already imagining his sleepy smile when I woke him up. The door was unlocked, which seemed odd, but I pushed it open quietly, not wanting to startle him. The smell hit me first. Sophia's perfume. That expensive French fragrance she'd worn since college, the one that cost more per ounce than I made in a day. It hung in the air like accusation. I found them in the kitchen. She was wearing his Princeton shirt and nothing else, her hair tousled in that perfectly imperfect way that took her an hour to achieve each morning. He was making eggs, still in his boxers, laughing at something she'd said. They looked like a magazine spread. The successful architect and his beautiful girlfriend, sharing an intimate Sunday morning in their perfectly appointed apartment. I was just the intruder who'd walked into someone else's life. Maya. Sophia's voice was bright, cheerful, as if finding your twin sister in your boyfriend's kitchen, wearing his clothes, was the most natural thing in the world. What a surprise! Jason was just telling me about his new project. Fascinating stuff. Jason at least had the decency to look ashamed. His face flushed red as he reached for a dish towel to cover himself. Maya, I can explain. Can you? My voice came out smaller than I intended, barely more than a whisper. The coffee tray slipped from my hands, sending hot liquid across the hardwood floor, and ceramic shards skittering under the refrigerator. Sophia stepped gracefully over the mess, somehow managing to avoid getting a drop on her feet. Don't be dramatic, Maya. Jason and I ran into each other yesterday, and we just started talking. You know how it is when you meet someone who really gets you. She said it like it was inevitable, like gravity or the sunrise. Something that simply happened to people like her, people who deserved good things. We were just having coffee, Jason said, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Sophia had some really interesting ideas about the museum project. Coffee, I repeated, looking at the intimate scene I'd interrupted. The way they'd moved around each other with familiar ease, the way she'd known where he kept his shirts. Maya. Sweetie. Sophia's voice took on that patronizing tone she'd perfected over 3 decades of being right about everything. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. But Jason and I have a connection that's just different, more mature, more intellectual. You understand, right? I understood. I understood that it was happening again. That I was being erased from my own life. That my feelings mattered less than her desires. I understood that Jason was looking at her the way he used to look at me, and that I had somehow become the third wheel in my own relationship. I need to go, I said, stepping back toward the door. Maya, wait. Jason started forward. But Sophia's hand on his arm stopped him. Let her process this, she said softly, like she was being kind. She needs time to understand that this is for the best. Maya's always been a little dramatic about these things. I left the coffee cooling on the floor, and walked out of the apartment, out of the relationship, out of another piece of my life that Sophia had decided belonged to her. That was 6 months ago. The engagement announcement came 2 weeks later. A tasteful black and white photo in the society section, Sophia radiant in a designer dress, Jason smiling beside her like he'd won the lottery. The caption read, "Local architect Jason Miller announces his engagement to marketing executive Sophia Hayes." The couple met through Hayes' twin sister, and discovered an immediate connection. Even in their engagement announcement, I was just the footnote that had brought them together. But this morning was different. This morning, as I walked to collect Sophia's dry cleaning, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was too hot, too obvious, too much like the emotion Sophia had always dismissed as dramatic. This was colder, more purposeful. This morning, I'd received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end had been professional, clipped. Ms. Hayes. This is Detective Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you about some irregularities we've discovered in your credit report. Irregularities. I'd sat up in bed, suddenly alert. Identity theft, specifically. Someone has been using your social security number to obtain credit cards and personal loans. We have reason to believe this has been going on for several years. My blood went cold. How much? The preliminary investigation shows approximately $87,000 in fraudulent debt, spread across multiple accounts and institutions. $87,000. I made $38,000 a year teaching third grade. I lived in a studio apartment above a bakery, and bought my clothes at Target. I hadn't applied for credit in 3 years. Would like you to come in tomorrow morning to review the documentation and file a formal complaint. Bring any relevant personal documents. Birth certificate, social security card, passport if you have one. I'd hung up the phone with shaking hands, my mind racing. Someone had stolen my identity, had been living off credit obtained with my information, had buried me in debt I knew nothing about. But who had access to my personal information? Who would do something like this? The answer came to me slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Sophia. We were twins. We'd shared a room growing up, had access to each other's documents, knew each other's personal information by heart. And Sophia had always been cavalier about money, always living just slightly beyond her means, always finding ways to finance her perfect lifestyle. I thought about the expensive apartment she'd moved into 2 years ago, the designer clothes, the luxury car, the elaborate vacations she posted about on social media. I thought about how she'd never seemed to worry about money the way I did, how she'd always waved off my concerns about her spending with vague mentions of bonuses and investments. I thought about the marketing firm where she worked, and how she'd been promoted unusually quickly for someone her age. I thought about the clients she'd landed, the deals she'd closed, the lifestyle she'd built that seemed just slightly too perfect, too successful, too easy. And I thought about how many times over the years she'd borrowed my social security card just for paperwork. How she'd had access to my mail when I was in college, how she'd always been the one who was better with money and had helped me set up my first bank account. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My twin sister, the golden child, the successful one, the woman who had everything, had been stealing my identity for years to fund her perfect life. But this time, she'd made a mistake. This time, she'd stolen from someone who had nothing left to lose. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Detective Rodriguez's number. Then I did something I'd never done before in my life. I decided to fight back. The next morning, I sat in Detective Rodriguez's office with a folder full of documents spread across his desk. Birth certificates, social security cards, old tax returns, bank statements, a paper trail of my actual life versus the one someone had been living in my name. The pattern is pretty clear, Detective Rodriguez said, pointing to a credit application dated 3 years ago. Someone with intimate knowledge of your personal information has been systematically applying for credit cards and personal loans using your identity. They've been making minimum payments to keep the accounts current, which is why you never received default notices. I stared at the signature on the application. It was close to mine, but not quite right. The loops were a little too perfect, the slant slightly different. It was the signature of someone who'd practiced writing my name, but hadn't quite mastered the muscle memory of 32 years. What happens now? I asked. We investigate. We subpoena records from the financial institutions, track the spending patterns, see where the money went. Identity theft of this magnitude is a felony, especially when it's been ongoing for years. We're looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, potentially RICSO violations if we can prove this was part of a larger scheme. RICSO violations. Federal charges, prison time. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. There is one thing, Detective Rodriguez continued, his expression serious. Cases like this, Family members, twins especially, they can be complicated. The defense usually argues that there was implied consent. That you knew about the accounts and chose to look the other way. They'll try to make it seem like a civil matter rather than criminal fraud. My heart sank. Even in this, even when I was the victim, there would be doubt about whether I deserved justice. But, he continued, if you're willing to cooperate fully, if you're willing to testify, if you can provide evidence that this was done without your knowledge or consent, we can build a strong case. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, and meant it. That afternoon, I went to collect Sophia's dry cleaning as planned, but this time I had a purpose beyond simple obedience. I had questions that needed answers. The dry cleaner, Mr. Park, had known our family for years. He'd pressed our school uniforms, cleaned our prom dresses, handled our professional wardrobe as we'd grown into adults. Maya, he greeted me warmly. Hair for Sophia's suits. She's doing very well, your sister. Always the expensive clothes, always the best fabric. She does like nice things, I agreed, watching him retrieve several garment bags from the back room. Business must be good. Oh yes, very good. She tells me she got the big promotion last year, the corner office. Says she's making 3 times what she made before. 3 times. I did quick math in my head. Sophia had told our parents she was making $60,000 a year at the marketing firm. 3 times that would be $180,000. That was hedge fund money, investment banker money. That was not small marketing firm money. She's very fortunate, I said carefully. Smart girl, your sister, always thinking ahead. You know, she came in last month, asked me about cleaning blood out of silk, said she'd gotten a nosebleed on her new blouse. I told her, cold water first, then hydrogen peroxide. Did it work? Blood on silk, nosebleeds. I filed the information away. Another piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. I carried Sophia's dry cleaning back to her apartment. A stunning 2-bedroom in the city's most expensive neighborhood. The building had a doorman, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the river. It was the kind of place I'd dreamed of living in but could never afford on my teacher's salary. The doorman recognized me, though he always looked slightly confused when he saw me. Mems. Hayes, he said, then corrected himself. I mean Maya, here to see Sophia, just dropping off her cleaning, I said, heading toward the elevator. Sophia's apartment was immaculate, all white furniture and abstract art, like something out of a magazine. Everything perfectly placed, perfectly chosen, perfectly expensive. I hung her clothes in the walk-in closet, marveling at the rows of designer suits, the shelves of shoes, the jewelry case filled with pieces that sparkled like captured starlight. This was what $87,000 in stolen money looked like. I was about to leave when I noticed something on her desk. A stack of mail she'd left unopened. Bills, mostly. But one envelope caught my eye. It was from American Express, and it was addressed to Maya Hayes. My name, my mail, at Sophia's address. I looked around the empty apartment. My heart pounding. This was mail fraud on top of identity theft. This was evidence. I photographed the envelope with my phone, then looked through the rest of the stack. 3 more pieces of mail addressed to me, all financial institutions I'd never dealt with. Credit card offers, loan statements, collection notices, all for accounts I'd never opened. All being sent to an address where I'd never lived. This was systematic. This wasn't just a few credit cards and impulsive shopping. This was a carefully orchestrated scheme to steal my identity and use it to fund her entire lifestyle. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia, running late for the Henderson meeting. Can you wait there for my package delivery? Should arrive around 3. I looked at the time, it was 20:45. I had 15 minutes alone in the apartment of someone who'd been stealing my identity for years. I'd spent my entire life being the obedient twin, the one who followed rules, who did what was expected, who never caused trouble. But sitting in Sophia's perfect apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, I felt something new awakening in me. If she wanted to play games with my identity, then it was time she learned who I really was. I started with her desk. The drawers were locked, but Sophia had always been predictable. She'd used the same passwords since high school, the same hiding places, the same predictable patterns. Under her jewelry box, I found a small key. The desk drawer opened to reveal a filing system that was methodical in its deception. Folders labeled with my name contained copies of documents I'd never signed, applications I'd never filled out, Statements for accounts I'd never opened. Bank cards with my name but her signature. Loan documents with my social security number but her address. But it was the last folder that made my blood run cold. It was labeled, Maya, personal. Inside were photocopies of my passport, my birth certificate, my social security card. But there were also things I'd never seen before. Medical records with my name but appointments I'd never made. A marriage license application with my name and Jason's. Dated 2 weeks before their actual engagement. She'd been planning to marry him as me. She'd been planning to steal not just my money, but my identity completely. There was more. Photos of me from years ago, documentation of my daily routines, copies of my school and employment records. A detailed file on my life. As if I were a person she was studying to replace. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note in Sophia's distinctive script. Maya timeline. Phase out by December. Full transition January. Jay won't suspect they're identical. Phase out. Full transition. She'd been planning to erase me completely. To take over my life while burying me in debt and criminal liability. I photographed everything, my hands shaking as I documented years of systematic identity theft and fraud. But just as I was about to close the folder, I found one more document that made my heart stop. It was a life insurance policy on me. With Sophia listed as the beneficiary, $500,000 if I died, with a clause about accidental death or suicide paying double. The policy had been taken out 2 years ago, around the time Sophia had moved into this expensive apartment. The blood on the silk blouse. The questions about cleaning methods. The detailed documentation of my life and routines. This wasn't just identity theft. This was something much darker. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly photographed the insurance policy and shoved everything back into the folder. The key went back under the jewelry box. The drawer closed with a soft click. The front door opened just as I made it to the living room. Maya. Sophia's voice called out. You're still here. The delivery hasn't come yet. I said, proud that my voice sounded normal. She walked into the living room. Stunning as always in a tailored navy suit, and heels that clicked against the hardwood floor. But for the first time, I didn't see my successful twin sister. I saw a predator who'd been systematically destroying my life, while planning something far worse. You look pale, she said, studying my face with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Are you feeling all right? Just tired, I said. Long day at school. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You work so hard for so little, Maya. It's almost tragic, really. All that education, all that effort, and what do you have to show for it? A studio apartment and a teaching salary that barely covers rent. Once, her words would have cut deep. Now, they just sounded like a confession. Some of us find meaning in helping others, I said quietly. And some of us find meaning in actually succeeding. She walked to the window, looking out at the view she'd bought with my stolen money. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd been born with a little more ambition, a little more drive? I wonder about a lot of things lately, I said. Something in my tone made her turn around. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her perfect features. What kinds of things? Family things, trust, loyalty. What people are really capable of when they think no one's watching. We stared at each other across the expensive living room. And I saw the moment when she realized I wasn't the same broken twin who'd walked into Jason's apartment 6 months ago. I wasn't the same woman who'd spent 32 years accepting that I deserved less, that I should be grateful for scraps, that my role was to step aside whenever she decided she wanted something I had. Maya, she said carefully, you're scaring me a little. You sound different. Maybe I'm finally growing up. The package delivery never came. I left Sophia's apartment with copies of evidence that would destroy her life, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. For 32 years, I'd loved my twin sister despite everything she'd done to me. I'd made excuses for her behavior, had convinced myself that her success justified her cruelty, had believed that somewhere deep down, she loved me too. Now I knew the truth. I wasn't her sister, I was her victim. And if I hadn't discovered her plans, I might have become her final victim. That night, I sat in my studio apartment above the bakery, and made a list. Not a list of things I'd lost, there had been too many of those over the years. This was a list of things I was going to take back. My name, my credit, my future, my life, and maybe, if I was very careful and very smart, her freedom. Detective Rodriguez was impressed with the evidence I'd gathered. "This is federal prosecutor territory," he said, spreading the photographs across his desk. "Identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, and now potentially conspiracy to commit murder with that insurance policy. We're looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison." "What happens next?" I asked. "We build the case carefully. We can't let her know we're investigating until we have everything locked down. If she suspects, she'll destroy evidence, maybe flee the country. We need to be smart about this." Smart. That was something Sophia had always accused me of lacking. But sitting in that police station, planning the systematic dismantling of my twin sister's life, I felt smarter than I'd ever felt before. The sting operation took 3 weeks to set up. The FBI wanted to catch Sophia in the act of using my identity, to have video evidence of her fraudulent activity that couldn't be disputed in court. They set up a fake loan application. Something large enough to be a felony, but attractive enough that Sophia wouldn't be able to resist. $100,000 personal loan with favorable terms, available to qualified applicants with excellent credit. The bait was perfect. They sent the offer to my address, but made sure it would be forwarded to Sophia's apartment, where my mail was being illegally diverted. Then we waited. She took it. 3 days after the offer went out, Sophia walked into First National Bank with my identification and my forged signature on the loan application. Federal agents were waiting. I watched from across the street as they arrested her, in the marble lobby of the bank, where she'd tried to steal $100,000 using my name. She looked confused at first, then angry, then terrified as they read her rights and led her away in handcuffs. For 32 years, Sophia had been the star of every story. Now she was just another criminal in an orange jumpsuit. The trial lasted 3 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of documented fraud, dozens of accounts opened in my name. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen. The insurance policy with the suspicious timing, the detailed files on my personal life. The handwritten notes about phasing me out. Sophia's defense attorney tried to argue that it was a civil matter, a family dispute over shared resources. But the federal prosecutor painted a different picture. This wasn't a sister borrowing money. This was a predator who'd systematically destroyed her twin's financial life while planning something much worse. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. Sophia was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. No parole for the first 10 years. Full restitution for the stolen money. Plus penalties and interest. Her assets were frozen and liquidated to pay her victims. I sat in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence. Watching my twin sister's perfect composure finally crack, she looked at me across the gallery, her eyes filled with something I'd never seen before. Fear. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. The steps were crowded with reporters and camera crews, but I didn't stop to talk to them. I had nothing to say about Sophia. No statement about justice or revenge or closure. I just walked away from the courthouse, from the cameras, from the story that would follow Sophia for the rest of her life. I walked toward my car, toward my rebuilt credit, toward the future I was finally free to choose. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. He'd been trying to contact me ever since Sophia's arrest, when he'd learned that their entire relationship had been built on stolen money and forged documents. The engagement had been called off, their shared assets frozen as part of the federal investigation. Maya. The text read, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I never knew. I never would have. Can we talk?" I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Jason belonged to the old Maya, the woman who'd believed she deserved whatever scraps life threw her way. The new Maya had higher standards. 6 months later, I moved out of the studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery, not to something extravagant. I'd learned the hard way what happened when people lived beyond their means. But to a real apartment with 2 bedrooms and windows that let in natural light, in a neighborhood where I could walk to work and feel safe at night. I used the restitution money from Sophia's conviction to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on the apartment. The rest went into savings, real savings, in accounts that only I had access to, with passwords that only I knew. I kept teaching 3rd grade, but I also started tutoring in the evenings. Not because I needed the money, but because I liked the feeling of building something that belonged entirely to me. My students adored me, their parents trusted me, and for the first time in my life, I felt valued for who I was rather than dismissed for who I wasn't. Sometimes people would recognize my name from the news stories about Sophia's trial. "Aren't you the twin sister of that woman who?" they would start to ask, but I'd just smile and change the subject. Sophia's story was over, mine was just beginning. I never visited her in prison. She wrote letters for the first year, long, rambling things full of justifications and excuses and demands that I help with her appeal. I threw them away unopened. Whatever relationship we'd had died the day I found those files in her desk, the insurance policy, the evidence that she'd been planning to erase me completely. I did think about her sometimes, especially on our birthday. I wondered if she understood now what she'd thrown away, if she realized that her obsession with being superior had cost her everything. But I didn't dwell on it. I had my own life to live, my own happiness to build, my own future to create. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying someone who'd hurt you. It was building a life so authentic, so genuinely yours, that their absence became a gift rather than a loss. 2 years after Sophia's conviction, I met David at a teachers' conference in Chicago. Not my old boyfriend David, a different David. A kindergarten teacher from Milwaukee with kind eyes, and calloused hands from building playground equipment on weekends. He didn't know about Sophia, had never heard of the trial or the scandal. To him, I was just Maya. A teacher who made him laugh and challenged him to be better, and never made him feel like he had to compete for my attention. We dated slowly, carefully. I'd learned not to trust easily. Not to assume that kindness was genuine just because it felt good. But David was patient with my caution, understanding of my boundaries, and secure enough in himself that he didn't need to tear me down to build himself up. When he proposed, it was in my classroom after school. With hand-drawn pictures from my students scattered across the bulletin boards, and afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Nothing fancy or dramatic. Just a quiet moment between two people who'd found something real. We had a small wedding. Just close friends and family members who'd supported me through everything. My parents came. Looking older and sadder than I remembered, carrying the weight of their own guilt about the years they'd favored one twin over the other. "I'm proud of you," my father said during our dance, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have said that more when you were growing up." "It's okay, Dad," I said, and meant it. I'd learned to forgive, not because people deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting. "It's not okay," he insisted. "We failed you, Maya. We let Sophia's success blind us to your worth. We're sorry." Sorry. It was a word I'd waited 30 years to hear from my parents. It felt smaller than I'd expected. Less transformative. But it was something, a beginning of healing that I hadn't known I needed. David and I bought a house in a neighborhood full of young families, with good schools and sidewalks where kids could ride their bikes safely. We painted the walls colors we liked, hung pictures that made us smile, planted a garden in the backyard where we grew tomatoes and herbs and flowers that served no purpose except to be beautiful. It was an ordinary life, the kind Sophia had always dismissed as boring and beneath her ambitions. But it was mine, built on honest work and genuine relationships and choices that belonged to no one but me. 3 years after our wedding, I gave birth to twin daughters. The doctor asked if we wanted to know which baby was older, and David and I looked at each other and laughed. "It doesn't matter," I said. "They're both exactly who they're supposed to be." I named them Emma and Grace, and from the moment they were born, I made sure they knew they were equally loved, equally valuable, equally capable of creating whatever life they wanted for themselves. I told them stories about kindness and courage, about the difference between success and fulfillment, about the importance of building others up, rather than tearing them down. Sometimes, when they were sleeping in their cribs, I would watch them and think about Sophia. I wondered if she ever thought about the children she might have had, the family she might have built, the genuine happiness she might have found if she'd chosen love over competition, authenticity over perfection. But those were just passing thoughts, like clouds across the sun. My focus was on the future, on the daughters who would never have to compete for my love, who would never wonder if they were good enough, who would grow up knowing that their worth came from who they were rather than who they were better than. The last time Sophia tried to contact me was on our 40th birthday. She called from prison. A number I didn't recognize but a voice I knew immediately. "Maya," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you." I sat in my kitchen, looking out the window at my daughters playing in the backyard, at the life I'd built from the ruins of the one she tried to destroy. "Forgive you, Sophia," I said, and realized I meant it. "Does that mean, could you maybe visit sometime? I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only family I have left, and I forgive you," I repeated gently. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending what you did was okay. It just means I'm not carrying the anger anymore. She was quiet for a long moment. "I threw away everything, didn't I? For what? Money, status, things that didn't even matter. You threw away yourself," I said. "The person you could have been if you'd chosen love over fear. If you'd celebrated others instead of diminishing them, if you'd understood that there was enough happiness in the world for both of us." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a while, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of feeling less than, the betrayal and theft, the fear and investigation and trial, the slow rebuilding of trust, the careful construction of a life that belonged entirely to me. Emma and Grace came running in from the backyard, their cheeks flushed with exercise and joy, already talking over each other, as they told me about the butterfly they'd found, the fort they'd built, the game they'd invented. "Mama," Emma said, climbing onto my lap, "Grace says you and Daddy were both teachers before you had us. Is that true?" "It is," I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "And you met at work?" Grace asked, ever the romantic even at 7 years old. "We did. That's so perfect." Emma sighed dramatically. "You both love kids. So you fell in love with each other, and then you had us." "That's exactly right," I said, kissing the top of her head. "When we grow up, we want to be teachers too," Grace announced. "So we can help kids like you do." "You can be anything you want to be," I told them, the words carrying the weight of everything I'd learned. "Teachers, doctors, artists, astronauts, whatever makes you happy. The only requirement is that you're kind to people and honest with yourselves." They nodded solemnly, then ran back outside to continue their play. I watched them through the window, two little girls who would never have to wonder if they were loved equally, who would never have to compete for their worth, who would grow up knowing that their value came from their character, rather than their achievements. I thought about the woman I'd been before everything changed. The doormat twin, the victim, the one who'd accepted less, because she'd been taught to expect less. She felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime, someone I was grateful to but no longer recognized. The woman I am now knows her worth. She chooses her battles carefully and fights them strategically. She doesn't accept betrayal as inevitable or cruelty as normal. She builds rather than tears down, includes rather than excludes, lifts others up rather than standing on their shoulders. And most importantly, she understands that the best revenge against someone who tried to steal your life is to live that life so fully, so authentically, so joyfully that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss. In the end, Sophia didn't steal my life. She just helped me realize how precious it was. Did you like this story of resilience and justice? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of twin betrayal and ultimate triumph, please support us with a super thanks, so we can continue bringing you more incredible life stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Maya's amazing journey. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.